Let's see, can anybody hear me? Oh, good. That's good. Can you hear my dog barking, Derek? Thanks, Alberto. Good, good. Yeah, me too, Monica. People say they can hear me just fine, which is nice. And all right, good. All right, I'm glad it's working. This is terrific. So, do I need to be concerned about the moderation panel down at the bottom, Monica? I think you can see it, as I hover here, turning them green. Okay, good. Then I won't worry a bit. All right. Are there any drawing tools in Hopin?
Hello.
Hi, Monica.
How's it going?
Good, good. Hey, I like to point with my mouse and stuff. Would there have to be any drawing tools with Hopin?
Not for this one. But if you have your presentation, you could actually be drawing on your presentation if that helps. See, and then also the moderator panel, if anyone wants to go live and ask any questions, that you're able to bring them on. But if not, then don't even worry about the moderator panel. Just gives people access to be able to jump on if they do want to come on.
That's nice.
Yeah. How's your morning so far?
Really well. I'm worried too much about my dog barking, but I'll live.
It's like the first week we came into the office because of the conference, everyone's kind of, doing their own office thing. I'm like, this is so weird coming in, but it's great to have everyone in the building.
It's such a nice building that AIM is in too.
Yeah, we like it. It's so different, it's so different not being in person, but the fact that we can be able to do this virtually and still be able to provide a great conference and have great speakers, this is really nice.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it so far. Hey, Tina.
Hi, Tina. One of our emerging leaders.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'd work for Tina in a heartbeat. She's fantastic.
Yeah.
And hopefully you don't mind being talked about in the third person, Tina.
Right.
All right. So I'm going to, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to hop off. If you need anything, let me know. I'll be in the background. But yeah, if anyone else wants to come on later for questions, it's great to kind of test out the software, go live. We love seeing people, and it's just great interaction between the speaker as well. So
yeah, that sounds good.
All right. Let's hop off here. Have some music in the background, just kind of.
Oh.
But that's for the happy hour, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Let's see.
All right. So I have to watch the chat because I can't hear all of you. And we're going to start in 6 minutes. All right. Martin Gardner is this classic guy from Scientific American, by the way, back in the day. So much fun. All right. Okay. So it's 2 minutes, and it's important to thank the sponsors that make Heartland Developer Conference possible. I'm very grateful to all of these companies as well as to all of you for coming to this chat today. I'm going to be keeping my eye on the chat, so if I'm not looking at you and I'm looking like this, it's because I'm looking at the chat on the second monitor. And one of the things that this application does, one of the things that we're going to go over today is an application that will let us send a tweet. So we can send a tweet 11 seconds after the hour, and we're using a cron tab expression, which we can decode with this fine piece of software. describe the expression. It says every 11 seconds starting at 0 seconds after the minute. So we're going to give this a spin. We're going to submit it. And while that's doing its thing, oops, got 1 more minute in my preamble thing. Okay, so I am running and that's looked good. So it's tweeting the hello HDC. So if I go back to the Twitters and look at my tweet stream here, we see hello HDC right there, sent a few seconds ago. And that kills time right up into 11 o'clock. And I'm really glad to see you, Aaron, in the chat, because Aaron, it was you that told me to do this talk. And so if it's great, you should blame Aaron, and if it stinks, you should blame me. So the whole point of this talk is to inspire you to get started noodling around with Spring Boot. You might have heard of Spring over the years. It's this huge thing, and it's got lots and lots of sharp parts. But Spring Boot has simplified it dramatically, came out a few years ago, and you know, some cool people are playing with it. So here's the agenda. The call to action is not to get you to use Spring Boot for some enterprise project. However, it's certainly capable of doing that. The call to action is to get you to start to noodle around with it. And as a part of that, one of the things is we're going to go through this Heroku stuff. And the nice thing about Heroku is it has a free tier. So without giving them a credit card or much of anything really, you can deploy apps on very, very small computers to do things. And that's really quite nice. So let's get started. I agree, Brandon. So the point of this slide is to talk about the Java ecosystem and the Spring ecosystem. So it's a big giant mess. And in here, Spring Boot, which is a handle that you can pick things up with, that does a lot of really cool things. One is, get used to my drawing app. One is this idea of starters. Back in the day, it would take the better part of a week to set up a new Spring app. You had to get all the components to work together just right. Otherwise, you'd have conflicts and it would not work. And so by having starters, you can have just a few lines in your dependency configuration file, start right up very, very quickly, as you'll see this morning. Another thing that's really nice is this idea of executable jar files. So back in the day, you had discussions of WebSphere or WebLogic or Tomcat or Jetty, on and on and on. And now you can just have an executable jar file. Spoiler alert, inside of that jar file is usually embedded Jetty or Tomcat. And one of the things that I'm not going to demo for you today, but I include reference to, is in the latest version of Spring Boot, Docker is a thing that you can easily generate a Docker container and go to town with. So, all right, clear my things. So the place that we're going to focus a lot of our effort on today is in just plain old Spring Boot that's using a Spring Boot web application or model view controller, where the web browser sends in requests to controllers. And then if you're doing things properly, you're going to have a service layer that makes it easier to test and all of those other things with your application. And finally, some model classes that can be marked as entities so that instances of them are stored in database tables. And it's amazing how you don't even have to touch a line of SQL to write a simple app anymore. So as a matter of perspective, many of us accept the fact that Python is coming to rule the world. And one of the things that's really popular in Python is this idea of Flask apps. And so over here, we have a very, very small Flask app, and you'll notice that it's using this @app route right here. And so that's a Python decorator that says when they request the slash, return hello world. And in Spring Boot, it's a similar thing. We have a annotation instead of a decorator on line 6 that says, hey, this is a controller. And then on line 8, we have a get mapping that says, should someone do an HTTP get for the URL that contains /hi, then execute this hi there function and return the string hello world to the end user. All right. So, all right. So far I've told you my secret purpose to get you to start noodling around with Spring Boot apps and putting them on Heroku at no cost and having tons of fun. It's a gateway drug. Next thing you know, you're going to have Linode and DigitalOcean instances and etc. And we've talked about the big picture and how annotations are used to build up tables of controllers and the endpoints that they handle. And we're going to see many other annotations to build up things as well. So, you know, it's always good to have a nice hello world instance. And our hello world instance looks like this, you know. So we can add a task, we can delete a task. It's, you know, your standard CRUD app, and we're going to go through that by the numbers. There's a repo for it so that you can grab it yourself and modify it and see just how easy and fun it is. All right, so as I like to say, you can build and run an application in just 8 tricky steps. That's how easy it is. So there's some one-time setup that you're going to need up here in the corner. You need to install the Heroku.com toolkit. Heroku is in the business of making money. They do give free instances with no credit cards, but you know, after half a dozen of your closest friends start using your app, it's not going to be performant, and you'll want to whip out that credit card as their bet. You could also get a DigitalOcean instance and run it there. Which one costs more? Only time will tell. The second one-time setup is a thing that's just fantastic called SDK Man. And what SDK Man is it's a way to manage all of the different software development kits in the Java ecosystem. You can switch between different Java development kits. You can switch between different software development kits. You can quickly install the Maven, which is a build manager, Gradle, which is a competitor, and so on. So SDK Man is just fantastic. So after you've installed SDK Man, you want to install the Spring Boot command line utility with the command SDK install Spring Boot. If you wanted to install Maven, you would say SDK install Maven, and so on. So now that we have Spring Boot, the first thing that we're going to do is step 1, where we initialize a new application with 3 dependencies. -D is for dependency. The first dependency is the web dependency. That gives us the @controller annotation, and it gives us the standard model view controller architecture, and so on. The next dependency is data, Spring Data's JPA, Java Persistent API. This allows you to have super simple access to database tables, no SQL needed. It's a mind blower. And then the third and final dependency that we're having Spring Tool automatically install for us is Timeleaf. Timeleaf is a great little templating language that's been around for quite some time. It's fairly easy to follow. It's documented really, really well. The other options here, the group is, like I frequently do org map Payne as a group, your domain, and then finally the application package, the last part of the package, and then the name of the app itself. Here is task list, and we put it all in a folder called Heroku 0. So super easy first step. The second step is we're going to change directory into Heroku 0, turn it into a Git repository, and then add everything that's in the Git repository. In step 3, we're committing those changes so we know where we started from. And when using an automatic generator, my opinion is that it's a good practice to have the command that you use to generate things in the commit message somewhere. So that's what's going on with the dash AM. We're setting that commit message. Step 4 is we're going to manually add Postgres and liquid base to the POM file. And here it is a POM file. And what that ends up looking like is this. And so here are the starters that we were talking about, clearly identified with starter in their name. And I've added Postgres and liquid base by hand. Postgres is a great database that's as old as the hills, and liquid base is a way to manage your database schema with source code. So what ends up happening there is, what ends up happening there is we get stuck in IntelliJ in a slightly embarrassing way. That's all right. Anyway, we'll see the liquid base database setup in a few minutes. So step 4 is it's time to add the guts of the program. That is to say, a controller to catch the HTTP GET. And when we do that HTTP GET, remember what it does is fetch all of these tasks from the database and then pass them off to the view where they get rendered. So that's what the controller does. The entity corresponds to the tasks themselves that are being stored in the database table. The repository is a complete mind blower where Spring metaprogramming magic reflection up the wazoo happens to dramatically simplify your lives. The HTML template is that beautiful bootstrap I was showing you a few moments ago. And then the database changelog is the thing that I tried to bring up, but IntelliJ got in my way. So let's keep going and take a look at that. But first, let me preview the other steps for you here. After we've added the stuff, we do a Heroku create. Heroku create creates an application. They set aside a small slice of computing resources for you and your application. The and is just shell script for if that worked, now do this next thing. Heroku add-ons create Heroku Postgres at the hobby or developer level. So that creates a database account for you, so to speak, on a Postgres server. And then you add everything in the current directory and commit things. And then finally, you do this piece of magic where you say, git push Heroku master. And when you do that, it notices that you're sending it up and it builds the whole thing and deploys your website. Since it gives you a random URL whenever you do your website, so in our instance, the random URL is frozen depths, so on. There's a command Heroku open that'll open up your web browser for you. And once that's done, we take a look at the logs. So let's dive into the guts and see what's there. So you've already seen a preview of the app and what it does. It's a simple to-do list app. And here on the right, we're using Maven. We know that because there's a POM XML project object model file. That's the file that lists dependencies and a few other housekeeping chores. Maven's as old as the hills, and it has a sibling Gradle that has a slightly more concise syntax, potato, potato. Let's talk about what's in the app itself. In the task list application, that's a Java main that kicks off Spring Boot, and Spring Boot then scans for all of those annotations. It finds all of the classes that are annotated with controller, and within that it finds all of the methods that are annotated for gets and posts and things like that with HTTP. And then it also scans for entities. Task is an entity that corresponds to the database table, and finally task repository is the small piece of code that tells Spring we're going to want to interact with that database table, saving objects to it, deleting objects from it, and so on. The database changelog is right here in DB changelog master. We can have more of those as we grow and change our database. Not going to go into that here, just going to make you aware that Liquid Base and its friend Flywheel exist, and they're nice to use. All right, so here we go. Here's our controller. We know it's a controller because on line 14 it says so. And one of the things that's nice is on line 15 we have a request mapping that says, hey, the default request mapping for all the methods here is slash. And so if somebody does on line 23 a get against slash, it's going to execute the method on line 24, show all tasks. And in this method, it's going to use the task repo and say find all the tasks. So that's a select star from task. And it comes back with an iterable, also known as a Java util list of the tasks object, and it puts them in this model map that you see here on line 24. And then finally, it returns task. And what this return value on line 27 tells it to do is it says, hey, look, see how there's this tasks dot, task.html. So let's see if I can get my drawing going here. There it is. So this task.html is picked up and used as the view template because we return task on line 27. So that's how it wires together. So the controller grabs the request and it reaches out and it gets a whole bunch of instances of the model task, and then it puts those into this model map container and sends it off to the view where it gets rendered. Other things to notice here is you can have several methods with different URLs and different HTTP methods, a post or a get. And then finally, we have to talk about auto wiring. Auto wiring is a really amazing thing. So in Java, you can programmatically at runtime inspect your code. You can say, for the class that starts on line 16, task controller, tell me about all the methods in this class. Tell me about the parameters of those methods. And so one of the things that happens is we see the constructor on line 19, and it has a parameter of task repository. So Spring goes like, this is a common convention. I'm going to generate a task repository for you because I can see it in the class path. And I'm going to, after I new that up and generate it, I'm going to pass it into the task controller's constructor where it gets remembered so that it can be used on line 25 to retrieve all the tasks. It can be used on line 32 to save a brand new task. And it can be used on line 38 to delete a task. So lots and lots of convention, and for years the whole industry has been doing convention over configuration. Ruby on Rails started it back in the day. Spring Boot is a believer in convention over configuration. Flask is as well, on and on and on. Many of the big frameworks are. All right, so let's talk about entities. There's two things here. One that I've been teasing the whole time, which is that an entity represents a database table. So here we have a database table called task, and this database table has one column for each of the publicly accessible fields in the class. And on lines 17 and 18, you see two private fields, but there's no getters and setters. And that's because Project Lombok on line 12 is being used to mark this class as a data class. So we get all of those getters and setters for free. And so all of the private fields have a public getter and a public setter. And the @entity annotation sees that, and in this case, builds a table with two whole columns in it. It's very traditional in apps that are greenfield database to have a ID as a primary key, which is what we see on line 17. On line 15, we're noting that it's the ID, and on line 16, we're saying, hey, we're just going to generate them 1, 2, 3, 4. Not very sophisticated. That's it. All right. Let's see. Spring does have ways to adapt to pre-existing databases, but I'm not going to talk about it here because the call to action of this talk is to get you to write some Spring Boot apps for fun, deploy them to Heroku, and it's a really pleasant thing. Let's talk about the task repository. This is it. It's literally 7 lines of code, and the first few are a Java package statement and some imports. And what's happening here is we're saying, look, we have a task repository on line 5, and it extends a create, read, update, delete repository that deals with task entities, and the primary key is of data type long. So that automatically gives us all of these methods that you see over here in the table, all the common operations. But wait, there's more. If you follow a conventional pattern, you can introduce new methods. And with reflection, Spring Boot, Spring Data looks at the name of the method and goes, I know what to do with that. So we have a task. Let's suppose we have a task field called name. We could say find all by name, and that would let us query things by passing in a name. So if you wanted to find all of Aaron's tasks or all of Tina's tasks, it would do that automatically. And there are ways to escape this gilded cage and write SQL against these queries. But again, we're having fun. This is an intro talk. All right. So here's an example of part of the time leaf template. This is the juiciest example. There's a loop that's starting on line 43. And so what's happening here, remember, is we have our demo, and there we have a table of the current tasks. And so on line 43, we start and we say we're going to have a whole bunch of table rows, and we're going to have one table row for every element in tasks. And tasks, you'll remember, is an iterable or Java util list of the tasks. And so as we start that loop, we have this task looping variable. And so on line 45, we can say things like task.name to get the name of the task. And on line 49, we can say things like task.id to get the primary key of the tasks so that we could delete it by primary key. And then finally, we close the loop just like we close the tag. All right. So Liquid Base is really neat. Flyway is another competitor to Liquid Base. They're both great. And here's an example. We're saying, hey, look, we're going to have this change log on line 1. We're going to have a change set. It's the very first change set. I swiped this from an article that I cite the source of a few slides ago, and they were trying to promote Memcache, which is beyond the scope of this talk, but that's why it says author Memcache. And it says to create a table called task that has a column ID of data type int, auto increment if you got it. It's primary key, so build an index on it. You can't put a null in this column. And then the next column is all about name, also not nullable. So things that we saw in that huge tour are worth echoing and going over a little bit. SDK Man, if you haven't used it before, it could change your life. Spring is the command line interface for doing Spring Boot kinds of things. There are talks out there on the internet where they'll have an entire Spring Boot program that fits in a tweet. Not the new size, but the old less than 140 characters. We saw some Spring Boot, Spring Web model view controller for the web app with the controller and the views and things like that. We saw some Spring Java Persistence API. Not only does it work with relational databases like Postgres, but you can get it to work with MongoDB and Elasticsearch, and the list goes on and on. The thing that's nice to note about Timeleaf is that you can use it inside of a web application or a standalone app. So if you need to generate 1 billion emails, not that anyone would, you could use Timeleaf in order to do that. It's good to be aware of a way to do dependency management in the JavaScript world. It's package.json. In the Java world, there's a couple major alternatives. There's Maven with its pom.xml and Gradle with its build.gradle. So Heroku, I get a percentage of every nickel that you don't spend at Heroku. So, sure to go out there. No credit card required. Doesn't cost a nickel unless you want lots of capabilities. Postgres, very, very nice. The controller, we talked about that quite a bit. Entity, Project Lombok, the idea of repositories in JPA, the Spring data repositories, the HTML template, and then finally the change management with Liquid Base. All right, so things are good. We did our little demo. We got our little feet wet. And so now if you want to noodle some more, we're going to talk about some other ways to do it. Two things that make that much easier are start.spring.io with no command line necessary. You can just click around, try things. And another thing is really nice is when you use H2, which is an all Java database. It's right there built into your app, and it has a killer web browser interface. So if we go out to start.spring.io, we can use this killer interface to pick what we want to do, all the different bells and whistles. And when we start up our app, like I did, we go to localhost 8080/H2 console to be able to look at the database. And at first I didn't have things set up, so I had to find a log statement that told me the name of the database, which is this generated universally unique ID here. And so I finally put that into the JDBC URL, and everything was great. Well, it turns out that you can use application properties to set values in different kinds of ways, and that's what we're going to do here with application properties and the -d Spring Profiles active dev. And what that ends up doing is it looks down here in the source main resources folder. You can have several application properties files here. And if the dev profile is going on, it uses everything that's in application properties. Perhaps you want to set some defaults there and then override those defaults when the dev profile is active. And in the dev profile, we have just the short name for the URL, so it doesn't generate a new and bigger one every single time. All right. So a little while ago, you saw me send a tweet. It was super dramatic. I know it made Aaron's day. And how do you do that? Well, it's this simple. You say Twitter update status, and then you pass it a string. And there's just a teensy bit of setup in there when you're doing it. And this is the setup. So we've brought in the project Twitter for J, and we've gone down here to create a Twitter app at developer Twitter.com. And we take those secrets and we put them in a file. I like to call mine .env. And then be sure to immediately put that file in your .getignore so you don't accidentally check it into your source code repository. You know, doing stuff like that will cause you to have to buy donuts for the whole team. So we have these name value pairs out there in that .env, and we read these and we take that configuration object and we pass it into the Twitter factory. And now we have a field called Twitter, and elsewhere in the code, we can just say Twitter update status and whatever string we like, and things are good. All right. So behind the scenes, the way that magic works is with OAuth 2.0, and Kasaki has an amazing article that I link to here that shows a whole bunch of the different flows. Very commonly when you're using a web browser, you'll see a flow where it says Matt's app wants to authenticate with Twitter or Facebook or Google, and this is not this. Because we've buried the secrets inside of the application, it just can do things on our behalf. You know, we can pull it up and, you know, schedule a tweet right now, and everything's great. So it's waiting, and it'll send that tweet out in a little bit. All right. So, oh my gosh, the Quartz scheduler, so simple, it says. It's not very Spring Boot-esque just yet, unfortunately. So here is an example of a fat controller, which is a derogatory term that says, hey, you've got too much business logic inside of your controller. So a lot of this really should be inside a service, so it's easier to test and whatnot, but what can you do? It's a demo program. So what's going on here is on line 36, we're getting the data through an HTTP post, and we have the tweet service that contains how to tweet, and we're actually making the Quartz timer entry by hand. So inside of the tweet objects, there's a Quartz string and a text string, and the Quartz string is something like you see up here with the, let me get my little marker going to town here. This, that bit, the whole thing, okay? And earlier in the slide deck is a way to decode those. I have yet to meet someone who can decode them like that off the top of their head. You know, maybe Aaron can. So we make a job, and if you have a job with the exact same name, there's problems. So we have a UUID in there on line 45. And then here's a very interesting piece. There's this idea of a job data map in Quartz, which is just a map where you can put name value pairs. So on line 48, I put the original tweet object so that when the job is run at noon, if we use the string up here with the 0012 in it, we would have the tweet. And we're also going to need a few other things. And in Spring, there's this application context that you can access most of the time very easily. And you can get beans out of it in order to do kinds of things. And so inside the job, I was having a little trouble auto wiring in the application context, so I put it in the map. So once we have the job, then we're going to build the trigger that we then wire into the schedule. So we get a job, what to do. trigger when to do it, you'll notice on line 53 we have the quartz scheduler and we're saying cron scheduler. So there's some history to this stuff. Cron tab is from the 70s and it shows, and because it works so well, quartz uses cron tab expressions, and there's an analog of quartz for the .NET world as well. So we have the trigger on line 55, we get a scheduler, and on line 56, we say when the trigger goes off, run the job, and then we start the scheduler. So let's see a little of that in action. Oh. Cancel. Exit presentation mode, thank you. So if we look at lost my running feeling. So I'm trying to run my tasks. Oops, I'm in the wrong spot. Here is the program that's been running all along, catching tweets and doing things. And we see, you know, the will tweet and the time scheduler, and then a few minutes later, we're going to see that it tweeted, the tweet text here. And one of the things that happens is right afterwards, the tweet is deleted, so they don't hang out for a really long time. And let's see if I can find my H2 business here. We'll go here. So the tweet that we sent out has been tweeted and deleted. And if we go in here and try to make another tweet, and we submit it, we'll see down here in the chat, the submitting, it's received, thanks for coming to this talk. And it's going to tweet it according to that cron expression, which is pretty fast from now. And, you know, the tweet text is there and it's deleted the job. So if we wanted to see it last a little bit longer, we would have to change the bit. So there it is, and we're going to make another tweet. And this one, we're going to change it to 44 seconds after the top of the minute. So we can come over here and we see the third demo there. And as we wait, it will eventually be tweeted and removed. And that's what's happened. All right. So I'm hoping that there's some questions, because in a minute, I'm going to start walking around my code, you know, like this guy that doesn't know what to do with an extra couple minutes in his talk. So Henry, it's great to see you. I'm glad that you, you know, like Lombok, we're constantly having to update the plugin as well. One of the things that happens with Lombok is when you start up, you'll get a little enable annotation processing in the corner. And if you don't click it, then you have a million errors because your getters and setters are not being dynamically generated. So that's kind of a problem. All right, back to the talk. So some of the more resources that are really, really good, there's two general categories, free and not free. So one of the things that's free and totally amazing even though this doesn't look like a hyperlink, it is this number 1. So this was a conveniently written article. I really love these spring guides. There's 2 things that are amazing about them. One is they think that most people can get this done in 15 to 30 minutes. Another is that they cover a gazillion million things. So like we'll just do the building RESTful web services. They all follow a pattern where you have the completed version and the starter repo. Drake, thanks for the question. Yes, I used to be a dyed-in-the-wool Eclipse user, but now I've given in, and I'm quite happy in the IntelliJ world. It's very pleasant, you know. So we have a complete, which is things are done, and if you want to follow along step by step, the initial. So that's the thing that's good to know about the spring guides is they're adding new ones all the time. There's a repo for each one. Every single repo is going to have a complete folder as well as a initial folder for following along step by step. Other things that are free is there's quite a bit of videos, like Amigos Code is this very, very articulate man that explains things really, really well, and he has a small training company where he gives away things for free. You know, I'm not familiar with ASDF, so that's interesting. Today I learned that ASDF is a competitor to SDK Man. Thanks, man. That's very cool. Huh. The package manager for all your languages. That's scary to me because you got your Node version manager for Node and Ruby version manager for Ruby stuff and so on. So my personal opinion, Henry, is because this claims to be the thing for all of your languages, I get really nervous. I also get nervous when people install Java things using RPM or Yum or whatnot. So this fellow, I like their tutorials. It's a house. It's not just one person, even though Eugene is the head of it, and he has Eugene Belebug. Sorry for my pronunciation skills being bad. He has a weekly newsletter that's really quite good. So this Pluralsight, I love Pluralsight. Talk to me for 5 minutes and you know that. They have really nice Spring classes. This brand new book on Spring Boot 2.3 is on sale right now. I think it's like $12 or something. And this Manning step-by-step project is really quite good as well. So this guy's on sale. Oh, the sale just ended. How sad. And this one's really nice because it walks you through and it has some checks and stuff like that. So let's see what's next. Trisha G, she is fantastic. She's a developer advocate for IntelliJ. So like just this morning, I saw a brand new talk where she was building a Spring Boot app with IntelliJ. And the JetBrains people, they also make Kotlin. And so she was coding it in Kotlin, which is a really nice JDK language as well. And so I thank you for being here and chatting with me. And the call to action is, I hope that you play with the Spring Boot apps. And if you go to this URL, it'll take you to a GitHub page that has a link to these slides. And inside of the slides, it points to another GitHub page that has the little Heroku 0 smaller talk. There you go. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Chaya. Thanks, Winyu. All right. So, and this one is a good one to start with. You can just immediately check it out and Heroku create, and off you go. So, thank you very much. I'll see you around town in the conferences. Thanks. Oh, I will be. I consciously left the programming jokes out. Thanks, everybody. All right. Thanks, Monica. Thanks, Dwayne. Thanks, Brandon. So I feel like giving you commercials while you're still here. So I'll give you a commercial for one of my favorite things. There's a thing out of New York City called the Coding Train, and they've started broadcasting again, and has nothing to do with Spring Boot, but it's so joyous. All right. That's it. I'm going to smash the leave button or do whatever Monica tells me to. Yeah. All right. All right. I'm going to smash the leave button, Monica. Here we go. Thanks, everyone.